about this industry is you're always needed. People always need people. Even if it's not necessarily automotive mechanics directly, it's something related to the fact that I can use my hands to fix things.
Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another exciting, thought-provoking episode of the Jaded Mechanic Podcast. My name's Jeff, and I'd like to thank you for joining me on this journey of reflection and insight into the toils and triumphs of a career in automotive repair. After more than 20 years of skin, knuckles, and tool debt, I want to share my perspectives and hear other people's thoughts about our industry. So pour yourself a strong coffee or grab a cold Canadian beer and get ready for some great conversation.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sitting here with Kenny Wessel, a good friend of mine. Kenny has a YouTube channel called Wrenchin with Kenny, who I found Kenny's channel about 3 months ago, I guess. And, you know, you all that know me on the Jaded Mechanic Podcast, you know I'm kind of a nerd for YouTube and social media content and stuff like that. And we're at ASTE 2023 down here in North Carolina, and Kenny's local.
I am now.
So I reached out to Kenny and I said, well, you know, are you able to make the conference, the big training thing? And he's like, I can't make the whole training thing. And I said, well, come by on Saturday then, and I'll show you around, introduce you to a bunch of people, and we'll knock an episode out. And we're as you know, we're about trying to tell people stories and try to give Kenny's platform and his channel a little bit more push. So, Kenny, introduce yourself and kind of get us started here on what you're talking about and how you feel.
Well, Jeff, thanks for having me. My name's Ken Wessel. I got a YouTube channel called Wrenchin with Kenny. I started it about 2 years ago, and it kind of snowballed.
Yeah.
And like I never really expected it. I just kind of did it for fun. Originally, I did it because when I moved away from New York, my son was asking me how to fix something, and I figured it was actually easier for me to make a video of how to fix it.
Yeah.
So I did that, and he said, you know, that's actually pretty good. You should think about throwing it up on YouTube or something similar.
Right.
So I was like, all right. So I started recording a couple of videos, and if you look at my first videos, they're not very good.
Listen to my first podcast. They're not very good.
And one of my daughters, I have 5 daughters and a son.
Wow.
My one daughter, she says to me one day, and because I actually almost gave up on it, and my one daughter said, hey, you know, that one video you got is going somewhere. I go, what do you mean? She goes, have you looked to see where it's at? I said, no. So I looked, and I mean, my videos were, 50, 60, 70 views. And all of a sudden, this one had 10,000 views. So I was like, that's interesting. Next thing I know, it's at 20,000. Then it's at 100,000. So I'm like, wow, okay, I'm getting traction here. So at that point, I started doing more and more videos, and it just kind of snowballed from there. And you reached out to me. Motormouth Radio reached out to me. It's been pretty cool.
You did the Motormouth just a couple weeks ago, wasn't it?
I did it last Sunday.
Yeah.
Because I was up in New York. It actually happens out in Long Island.
Right.
And I had to go up there anyway. I visited my mom, one of my daughters, and my son. Mm-hmm. And so I went out there to do the radio show, and I helped a friend of mine who happened to be moving down to the area. So we got moved down here from that, but that was the reason for me being up there in the first place anyway, was just to visit, and because that's where I'm from.
Right.
So
yeah, because you just moved recently to North Carolina, right? So you left a shop up around in New York.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, a B&M Auto Body.
Okay.
I left there. I worked at a dealer for 21 years, Chrysler dealer.
Yeah.
I left there to help a friend of mine at his body shop. He was going through some medical issues, and so I helped him with his shop while he got through what he needed to get through. Mm-hmm. And like I said, I was there for about 3 years, and then left from there. My wife and I just decided to, all the kids are grown up. Let's do something different.
Yep.
And we decided to move down to the coast of North Carolina, near, not at Myrtle Beach, but like kind of close. We were actually in North Carolina, not South Carolina. Yeah. And we were there for about 3 years, and we decided this isn't the place for us. So 3 of our daughters actually live relatively close to here, and we're like, let's start looking in that area. So we started looking. We just happened to find a house that fit what we wanted. And next thing you know, here I am, up in this area.
So what year did you start? What was your first job as a technician, or way back then maybe they would have called it a mechanic?
I actually started when I was in middle school, believe it or not. On my walk to school, there was a shop. I don't recall the name of it, but they did, I think they called it black market cars at the time, where they took Mercedes, that's what they specialized in. They took Mercedes-Benz from Germany, shipped them over here, and then made them meet the U.S. standards.
Right.
So at that shop, I actually learned how to weld, and I will never call myself a welder because I am not. I learned how to do some welding. I learned how to do some wiring. They taught me quite a bit.
Yep.
And I was there for a couple of months. I didn't even have a driver's license at the time. I was there for a couple of months, and then I went into high school, and I just couldn't work. Not at that place because it was too out of the way for me.
Right.
And so then in high school, I just kind of did my own stuff, and then I worked at a couple of shops, kind of as like a gas pumper, but I would help out in a shop. And one shop, the guy even said to me, "Why are you pumping gas? You actually," I was 16, I think, and he said, "You know more than my mechanic knows."
Wow.
So I was like, okay. So he had me come in the shop, and I wound up doing, I remember it was I think it was a 67, 68, 69 Barracuda with 4-wheel drum brakes.
Yeah.
It was just a plain Jane. And I wound up doing a 4-wheel brake job on it. And he was amazed that this kid could do this better and faster than the guy he had as a mechanic.
Right.
So it kind of went from there. When I got out of high school, there was a shop up the street. They were looking for a helper in the shop. So I was like, all right. So I applied there. They hired me. And originally I was cleaning bathrooms and sweeping the floors, dumping the garbage, helping with oil changes, helping rotate tires, stuff like that. And they quickly realized I knew more than they thought I knew.
Right.
And I didn't sell myself.
Yeah.
That's not who I am. And I wound up, next thing I know, side by side with their mechanic. And their mechanic, his name was Richie Casciano. And he taught me an awful lot.
Yeah.
He taught me the right and wrong way. Even though I could do drum brakes, he taught me the right and wrong way to do stuff like that. And he taught me quite a bit. He taught me how to do head gaskets, and he was really good. And I come to find out he was only a couple of years older than I was at the time.
Yeah.
But I stayed there for 4 years, and it was a good shop, North Broadway Auto Service in North White Plains, New York.
Nice.
And from there, I actually wound up getting my own shop. So I had my own shop for 7 years. Unfortunately, I had leased the property.
Yep.
I tried to purchase the property because I knew it was coming up for sale. But the guy who had the shop next door to me, I guess he knew the owner better than I did. He wound up buying the property. So all of a sudden my rent went from $2,500 a month to $5,000 a month.
He's obviously trying to force you.
He was forcing me out.
Yeah.
So I couldn't afford that.
Yeah.
So at that point I left and went to the dealership world because I had 2 small children at the time. And I was like, you know what? I need to have a job now. So the Chrysler dealer down the road, they were hiring.
Right.
So I got a job with them. That was my first experience in the dealer world.
Right.
And it was actually my first experience with a 2-post lift because my shop had in-ground lifts.
Right. Yeah. I started on one of them still in 2001. They still had, I was working in a shop that had a big in-ground.
Okay.
And it was scary because, it would come rocking it out of the floor so fast, right?
Yeah, the old air over hydraulic.
Yeah, and you could, I remember being like, you spin the car, on the top, and like it would leak down, so we had to live locks, and it was trash. But when you when you walked into the dealership, at any of the shops that you've been to before, had you ever worked, like, how was your pay set up?
Everything was hourly.
Hourly.
Everything was hourly.
Yeah.
And the first shop that I really worked at, the one that right out of high school, that shop, it was hourly, and I remember he had bonuses, like depending on what jobs you got done. Excuse me. And it was a great place to work. It really was. I enjoyed that as a beginning experience, and I would call that my real beginning experience as a mechanic.
Right.
But then when I went to the dealership, it was flat rate.
Yeah.
Which that was my first ever experience with flat rate.
So can I ask what they were paying you at the hourly? What kind of rates were you talking about back then? I know it's hard to remember that far back, eh?
I want to say, because this was 1980. No, I'm sorry, 1997. I'm sorry, 1997. And I want to say it was, I think I started at 16 an hour.
Right.
I think. Flat rate. But yeah, we started at 16 an hour. But I could make money.
Yeah.
I could make money there. I would, in the beginning, working flat rate was so unusual for me.
Yeah.
But once I got used to it, I could make money.
And you were telling me, so we were reminiscing about some of the old models that I had seen, because you're older than me, but we kind of probably we've probably put wrenches to a lot of the same cars, right? Yep. You loved the neons you were talking about, and you started, so kind of, I want to say the OBD1 LH kind of Intrepids, the old 300s, that kind of stuff. Like, I can remember seeing them, and luckily by the time I was working on them when I started in 2000, the OBD1s anyway were out of warranty. So they were great. They were paying good.
Yep.
And you talked about the 604 transmissions. You did a pile of those, right?
Yep.
And I said, oh, yeah, up in the wintertime, we'd always look for icy roads because, somebody go to pull out of their driveway, bald front tires, and throw that pin right through the case, right?
Yep.
And we loved that because it was such a moneymaker. Like it was. But you kind of cut your teeth on Chrysler, same as me. And you said you loved the neons and,
Oh, the neons were great. They were... As a technician, they were money makers because you got so used to fixing them. I apologize for that. I don't know what.
It's okay.
You get so used to doing, the head gaskets that would leak oil and timing belts and stuff like that. They were just absolute money makers.
Yeah, yeah. And I always remember them like. Well, I told the story. I worked with a guy. I told you the story. They had some piston knock in the first generation ones, right? It was the running joke as well. Every a K car or the 2.2 platform that had ever been built, right? The previous one, every one of them had a piston knock. That was just how you knew a K car or any of the Chryslers come by because it knock, 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 knock. You could hear it coming by.
Yeah, and they would last forever, though.
Oh, they ran forever like that. And I can remember him, my foreman, my mentor at the dealership. I remember him doing 4 pistons in a neon in an hour and 15 minutes. And because I was putting, like I told you the story, I was putting a heater core in my 1980 GMC truck. We were both staying there late after work. And I'm putting a heater core in an 80 GMC half ton that I was driving every day in like 2002, 2001. And he drove an ACR neon. Okay. Right? And he had a really ghetto nitrous setup, just a basic, he let the knock sensor on the factory side control the detonation, and he would just, he'd pour 100 shot to it, threw some fabbed up stuff right into the airbox above the throttle body, and away he'd go.
And wing it from there.
And he beat a lot of fast Hondas, a lot of fast Volkswagens. We're talking 2001, right? We're talking before the Fast and Furious thing kind of kicked off.
Yep.
It was, because it was Ottawa, it was a bigger city. It started to have an underground following. And I moved to Ottawa, I'm like, what is all this front wheel drive stuff?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd grown up in, my father was a collision tech. So I'd grown up in, my dad always restoring cars in our backyard garage. So, we always had a Mustang around, or he put lots of rear quarters and trunk floors in a Camaro. So there was always some pretty cool stuff around. And when I come up there, I'm like, what's all this front wheel drive stuff? And I was a Hot Rod magazine kid from the time I was probably 12 years old. All I did was read Hot Rod magazine, Popular Hot Rodding. Carcraft was like my Bible, right? Those guys, when they got onto the idea of like, how can I rebuild a small block Chevy for, beer money and make it, make 300 horsepower? That was all I wanted to do. Was work on a small block Chev. So when I saw this front wheel drive stuff, I'm like, that can't be fast. And then he took me for a ride in that neon, and I'm like, that's friggin' wicked. Yeah. It was so cool. So he was a great mentor in terms of how to work in a dealership, for repetition, pattern failure, learning how to, for all intents and purposes, how to make money. How to take an oil change ticket and do a proper inspection on the car, or know the product well and be able to say, okay, well, she's here for an oil change, but also the car's got some control arm bushings that are shot, and that was my first exposure to that, because the shop that I'd been in before, if the customer didn't come in complaining about it, if it wasn't going to break on the way home, if it wasn't going to leave them stranded on the way home, you didn't really push to sell it because, they don't have any money.
Yep.
You know?
And that's what happened even when I had my shop. You didn't push to sell anything.
Yeah.
But when you get to the dealership level, you're pushed to sell. And they used to get aggravated with me because I didn't try to push stuff that was, maybe not, I don't know if the wording is correct, but it's not that it wasn't necessary, but it wasn't detrimental to the car at this point in time. So it's like, mention it.
Yeah.
Hey, in the future, it's not like you need it right now.
Right.
So
yeah, it's tough though, right? Because you've seen the we were talking off air, the proliferation of like people doing more DVIs, digital vehicle inspections.
Yes.
And like mine at the process where I'm at my shop now, it's nothing to take 20 photos of a car. Mm-hmm. The master cylinder reservoir, the washer fluid, the wipers, you turn the key on, you dash lights up, any warning lights that are sitting there running, document that, photograph that. But I can remember back in the day, everything was a handwritten work order.
Yep.
I used to write down bushings are shot, brakes are shot. It was just shot.
Yeah.
Control arm bushings are shot, ball joint shot, and then I would whip that to the service advisor, and it was his job to go and look up the parts, look up the labor, right? Come to me and say, is that labor enough? Yes or no? And by then I was already pulling another car in.
Yep.
That's how we worked it, right? I was saying earlier today, I did so much diag when I was at the dealer in the parking lot because I would have a bay tied up, waiting on a brake job for approval, and we'd have one towed in, and it's immediately like, I put myself on hold and I'll go grab that tow in,
right.
And see what's going on because I don't. And then when I got 2 bays, it just was the same thing. I was constantly always like, the wheels are off, the brakes are shot, the rack and pinions leaking, the control arms are shot, the struts are shot, whatever, right? Or, I used to watch guys that, and this is, some people may not agree, our transmission guys, when you and I talked about the 604s, they'd pull the tranny, and if it had bad struts when they were pulling it, they sold the strut job.
Yep.
And that was you want to talk about some lucrative overlap.
Oh, yeah.
There was some good money there,
Absolutely.
right? Because how much of that stuff's already out of the way anyway to do the transmission.
Yep.
And all of a sudden you're doing the struts. So the first time I was ever seeing guys like hit 80 and 100 hours in a week were our transmission guys.
Yep.
And then the trannies started to get better for Chrysler.
Yep.
And they didn't start to make so much money, But so you stayed there quite a while.
Yeah, 21 years was total.
Long time.
Yeah, I left the first dealer after about a year because the dealer that was actually closer to my house was hiring. Mm-hmm. So I made the switch. So I was a grand total, it was almost 22 years.
Yeah.
But between the two. So
did you do any work on the Vipers?
No. We had, I don't think I could fit in one, to be honest with you. We had 2 guys that were dedicated Viper guys.
Yeah.
But the shop kind of split itself up to where we had 2 guys that were really good with diesels. Mm-hmm. So they would kind of get, even though I'm diesel certified now,
right.
2 guys that were really good diesels, they would get diesels. You had another guy who was really good with tranny, so he would have a tendency to get more tranny work, even though, I would get tranny work too, but he would get more of it than I would.
Yep.
I would get, it seemed a little more of the drivability type issues, the electrical weird issues.
Yeah.
So I always had something apart with wiring harness issues.
Yeah. It's a Chrysler after all, right? I
Yep.
lived in the Bay. I always had a DRB3.
Yep.
There's a flashback for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
I always had a DRB3 and a harness open somewhere. Yep. Always, all the time. It seemed like that thing, once it was in my hand, I never put it down. I started second shift at a dealership. So second shift was, I came in at 10 in the morning and I worked till 8 at night.
Oh, okay.
And I was hourly because I wasn't yet what we call up in Canada certified. So if you weren't certified, normally you're paid hourly, and you're paid a lot less hour than what you'd make as flat rate. And so because I was hourly, they started giving me at first a lot of the programming recalls. Mm-hmm. So there used to be I can still remember there was a Grand Cherokee recall for testing essentially whether the system would vent through the filler neck, and there was a long thing you had to go down, and then you had to run through the vent test with this probe down the fuel tank, open up the flapper valve, make sure that it would work, and then blah blah blah. That was the first time anybody handed me a scan tool and a TSB, said, "Here, go do this bulletin." And you remember the TSBs then, it would lay out, go to screen or whatever, DRB3, hit this function.
Yep.
Well, then, of course, hourly, when you start to play with the tool, what else will the DRB3 do?
Yep.
Before long, within probably 4 months, I was the guy at the second shift. So after 5 o'clock at night, when all the regular techs, the guys went home, they were just giving me one check engine light after another, one programming problem after another, because I could navigate the tool. A lot of these guys are on the second shift with me. They didn't get Chrysler training. And they were flat rate. So for them to come in was like, this is a customer for tires, this is a customer for brakes. Maybe there's a used car to recondition, but they didn't give me a lot of that stuff. So I very quickly learned that tool and what it would do. And then I could navigate the service information. And so we started to get where, say a guy did a check engine light in the daytime, 10 o'clock in the morning, customer leaves. Customer comes back 6 o'clock at night, check engine light's back on. Well, I was still there till 9 o'clock that night. Right. So they gave me that comeback. Because I was hourly.
Right.
Didn't matter.
Didn't matter to you.
And I'd go in and it was like simple things like, well, there's a broke wire, you know. I mean, and I don't mean simple in the sense that it's just a broke wire, but you'd unplug the, vent solenoid. Not vent solenoid, you know what we called it back then, but, well, there's no power at it. And then so it had a brand new shiny one on it. The guy put it on that day. But then I would just,
Yeah, being flat rate, he would throw a part on because that's the most common failure.
Kick it outside because he only got 0.6 for his diag. And then that part might only pay like 0.4 to put it in, right? Because it's right there. Yep. And, he was always trying to I need the brake job that's going to pay me 4 hours.
Yep.
The drivability. So I quickly kind of at least learned the pattern failures, the weak points on the product line.
Right.
I thought I was pretty sharp, but the reality is I just knew the product well, right? And we'll get into that.
Yep.
So when I went and moved dealerships, the next dealer I was at, I was flat rate, and I was scared to death. I was worried because, I'd done some head gaskets on a Neon, but I wasn't banging them out 45 minutes. I was slow. I was meticulous. I was I was doing them the way that, school had taught me how it was supposed to be done.
Yep.
No. So I was never an R&R kind of whiz in terms of speed. I could do it, but I wasn't it's just always seemed to be from the time I had a DRB3 in my hand, somebody just started giving me more of those electrical problems, more of that drivability problems. And, I ran with it. I took it as a great opportunity. So, Well,
especially being hourly, that actually worked to your benefit.
Yeah.
Because I was always flat rate, and it's so, I'd want to learn more about it, but it's like, as soon as I got done with something, I got something else. Yeah. And then next thing you know, it's the end of the day, and it's like, I want to learn a little bit more, but I can't. I got to go home.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife would get not angry, but you coming home?
Yeah.
I'm still trying to figure something out.
There was lots of nights like that. I was there 7, 8 at night, right? Because our sales department would be open until 9.
Yep.
And all the other techs had gone home, and I'm there trying to figure out a check engine light. I'm there trying to figure out why, after it gets hot, it won't run for shit. Mm-hmm. And I'd be I had keys, come in, leave, work, whatever. Yep. Nobody cared. And it was a lot of that. I wasn't getting paid for that. I was off the clock. But I was one of those stubborn, SOBs that's like, I got to know what's wrong with this.
You want to know.
That's... Yeah. And you know what it's like at the dealership. If you think it's a cam sensor, well, there's another Caravan 2 bays over. Exactly the same. You pull that out of there, jam it in or you go get one of the sales lot, right? The trade-ins or whatever. Pull it out of that, put it in that car, go drive it. Oh, same thing. It ain't that.
Yep.
And so swapnostics, is still a very real thing that happens. And you know what? It's a very viable way sometimes when we talk about, if I can change that sensor in 2 minutes, right? Why am I not just going to do that? You know what I mean? Like if on a car that I'm lost. Now, if I got one code and it's giving me a symptom and I can diagnose the code, but if you're trying to figure out why it's laying down at 55 miles an hour, right, when it's hot intermittently, and you can't get it's not giving you a code, and you're maybe not catching it on the scanner, you're going to try that, Yep. So no fault, no hate on the guys that do it that way. But so
I had a video, I don't remember which one it was, but it was like I came across a problem, and it's like, I know what the problem is going to be. It's going to be this. So, and I changed it, and I said, I'm not going to diagnose this. I'm going to change the part. Yes, I'm loading the part shotgun. Yes, I'm changing the part. And it fixed it. And then somebody made a comment, about like, oh, you're not doing too much wrenching, as wrenching with Kenny. And it's like, yeah, I kind of explained that. And it's like, and you can't do it all the time. Sometimes you just know, hey, this is what it's going to be. And yeah, it does come from experience.
Yeah.
But yeah, swap Gnostics is definitely a viable way of doing things. Prefer not to do it if possible, but if you know what it's going to be, why not?
And we still have to add that reference in that we're not saying to put the part on, it didn't fix it, leave the part in, bill the customer, and try another one.
Not.
We're not trying to say that. We're trying to say, if the crank sensor, how many of those did you change in your career?
Oh, can't even tell you.
Right? You get in and you just know. Like it starts fine every morning when it's cold, and then he drives down to he drives 20 minutes to work. He stops to get a cup of coffee, comes out, and the thing won't start, and it's just cranking over, and then he comes out at the end of the day, and it starts up and fires when he drives it home, and it goes on and on and on. Yeah, maybe you get a 320 DTC in there.
Yep.
But even if you can, and it, you don't have, our initial diag was 36 minutes. 0.6, right? So it was 0.6 was what we were allotted for DRB test initial diag. And you knew it's going to be an hour of me driving this thing, getting it hot before I may be able to recreate it. And I don't have a fault, but it's a Magnum 5.9, 5.2, 3.9 in a Dakota or a Ram or whatever. It's getting one.
Yep.
And, it fixed it.
Yep.
Right? And the transmission guys, I've seen more than one knock it when they're taking the tranny out, right? They hit the thing.
Yep, they
so that was
crack it or just snap it completely off.
Yeah.
I've seen that.
We've seen that where it's like if it just had a tranny out and then all of a sudden it's got an intermittent no start. I
apologize.
It's getting one. And people, you probably saw it. Everybody said way back in the day Chrysler ECMs were garbage, like we used to put ECMs in all the time. I honestly didn't see that.
I didn't either.
I saw a lot of wiring harness problems.
Yep.
Right? A lot of connector issues. Tip-ems, right? Were you there when that was just... Were you already gone by that was starting to roll out? Or
the tip-ems?
Yeah.
No, I was there for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, tip-ems were a problem.
Yeah.
But I can't tell you how many times I've seen people blame a PCM or a BCM or whatever, TCM, and it's not the problem.
Yeah.
And it's like, did you really diagnose the issue?
No.
It's easy to blame one. I hate coming up with that conclusion.
Yeah.
When I come up with a PCM being bad, I wind up going through the test 3 times.
Yep.
I want to make sure that did I do everything right? Did I cover the bases? Because it is kind of uncommon for it to be a failure.
Yeah.
But
everybody used to say, Chrysler ECMs are the worst.
Nah, I didn't see that.
I always found GM, after I got in the aftermarket, built a way worse engine control module than Chrysler ever thought about doing.
Well, it's funny too because people would complain about Chryslers. Like the Dodge Omnis. Remember those things? People would say, they're just throwaway cars. They're junk. Yeah. My dad had one to 400,000 miles on it.
Do you remember the GLHs? The Go Like Hells?
Yeah.
Were they not something?
Oh, they were fun.
Oh, and I remember. You probably remember. I had a 1990 Dodge Shadow.
I did too.
With a 2.5 turbo in it.
I did too.
And I mean,
and a 5-speed.
Yeah. Oh, see, I had an automatic.
Yep, 5-speed.
I had a sunroof, and I thought I was and so I was driving that in probably 2003. I thought that was the coolest little car I'd ever owned in my life, and fast.
Yeah,
it wasn't slow.
No, they're fast little buggers.
And I loved it. It was like it was the coolest little car. Now, once the injector cell started to leak, like they did as I got older, and it was getting to be harder to find an injector. Was what I wanted to pay for one.
Right.
I was like, I'm not going to put a used injector in it. And they're like, you want $100 for an injector?
Yeah.
Oh, I'll just get rid of the car. Yeah. I just gave it to a friend of mine. There's a really cool story. I've told it before. We had a Dodge Shadow come in probably it was probably 2005. I want to say like a 98 Shadow came in. Wouldn't run. And it wound up in the bay next to me. And the guy is over there, it's cranking over and it's not firing up. And he pulls out a compression gauge. And he pulls out the first spark plug that goes to number 1. He screws the gauge in. He bumps the key over and cranks it up. Doesn't build any compression. He goes out to the advisor and he says, the head gasket or the engine's bad. Guy's like, customer, so they call the customer. Yeah, you got low compression. You should do some advanced assessment, some diag. And they're like, well, we've had the car 8 years. It's been a money pit. We're just going to get rid of the car. Now, we kind of had been looking, him and I, back and forth at the history of the car, and it had a recent transmission rebuild in it. It had some other parts on it, and I'm thinking, my friend needs that transmission. So I went out to the advisor and I said, can I buy that car from them? I have a friend that needs a transmission. They're like, yeah. So I said to them, I said, what's their bill? $200. I paid the bill. So the next day, so the car's outside. He pushes outside. This was when I was just starting to actually think about how to diagnose things from a different way. The car's sitting outside, and I'm cranking it, and it sounds nice and even, but it won't fire it up. And this is it won't fire it up, and it's, I'm looking at data, and I'm like, that's weird. So I go and remember the inline spark testers?
Yes.
Right? So I had 4 of them. Right? So the old 2.2, I take the wires off the coils. I put the inline spark tester between the ignition wire and each plug. Mm-hmm. And I'm cranking it over, and it's only firing on 2 cylinders. I thought, that's weird. So I take the distributor cap off real quick. I lift that plate up. You've seen it. There's the reluctor, right?
Yep.
Pieces of reluctor laying in the bottom of the distributor. I bought a junkyard distributor for $50 that afternoon. The next day, so we're on to the next day. Put it in, right? And you know how easy that is. There's hardly any time or anything like that. And was sitting there doing burnouts and donuts out in the parking lot. And I sold that car to my buddy for $900. And he then drove it for another 3 years.
Wow. So
why, you're asking me, well, why does it have low compression? The Schrader valve in the end of his hose was junk.
I've done that.
Yeah.
I've done that.
So, and that's not me ripping on somebody else. It's just, that was one of the first times that I learned, wow, he's an older tech than me. He's got a lot more experience than me. And
he brain farted.
Yeah. His process is different than mine.
Yep.
And that's not me throwing shade on anybody. That's just a situation of, we all have a brain fart. And, it was, that's when my boss kind of looked at me and he said, you kind of understand what you're doing with this stuff, eh? And I'm like, I think I am. And it just whirlwind from there. It was, I can remember when the wireless control modules, when they went to that fob key came in, they'd come in off we'd PDI them, and a month later, the customer would be driving them, and then all of a sudden they would tow in. No configuration in the car, completely gone. And we're like, and I remember the first couple ones, I just restored config. I didn't know why it went, but I just hooked it up to YTech, restored the complete configuration in the car, and it would start to work again. And then it'd be gone. It might go 2 months this time. And then it would same thing happen again. Until he finally phoned Tech Line, 1-800-361-2702. Right? That's how many times did I call that? The number's still memorized. It's probably changed by now. 5850 was my dealer code.
Okay.
And you talk to them, you're like, what is going on with this? And they'd be like, so we've had a few rash of these at dealers all over Canada and the US. They're finding that the wireless control modules are bad. And then eventually they recalled the stupid things. You ended up getting a whim, and then nextly you got a whim and 2 keys.
Yep.
Right. But I was doing them like they were going out of style.
Yep. I remember that.
It was so cool. So, and I mean, I love that product. I love the 3-liter. I love the 3 liters in the vans. I made so much money on them. Mm-hmm. The PT Cruisers I hated.
I think everybody hated them.
They're fast. The turbo one.
Yep.
Fun little car to drive. But I hear other guys say it too, and that to me is the worst timing belt I've ever done in my life. Is a 2.4 turbo PT Cruiser.
It's one of the worst.
Yeah.
That and a power steering pump. You ever do a power steering pump?
Oh, so I have here's a story about a power steering pump. I get one towed into me one day, and it has a brand new power steering pump on it. And guy hands me the keys and he says, won't start. So I go through my process and it's not making any fuel pressure. I'm like, start checking. Well, my fuel pump relay has no ground. So anyway, the advisor, he's got a guy out in the waiting room waiting. And he's like, I'm like, what is the backstory on this? Oh, was that some other shop and they put a power steering pump in, and then right after that power steering pump, it wouldn't start. I'm like, how does one cause the other? That doesn't make any sense. And the customer is now in my bay. He's kind of looking over my shoulder going, so it doesn't need a pump? And I'm like, no, dude. Like, I jumped the relay out and I get the pump to turn on. I go back and make the pump turn on and I can fire the car up. Well, I think it's a fuel pump. And I'm like, how are you involved in this car? He's like, oh, it's a friend of mine. I'm like, are you the one that put the fuel pump or the power steering? No, I didn't put the power steering pump in this. And I'm looking, and it's an ignorant thing to do, right? Mm-hmm. There's bolts missing and all this kind of stuff. And so about 45 minutes goes by, and I'm like, there's no ground on the relay. He had broke the wire off. The wire that grounds the relay is right over near the engine mount.
Okay.
And when he had jacked it up so far, he had busted
Ripped
that
it
right off, slammed it back down his pump, and then they towed it out. And I remember I felt so bad because it was like the guy standing there, and I'm like, well, whatever idiot did this pump should be shot in the face, because I said half the bolts are wrong, nothing's torqued, this is loose. Meanwhile, the guy that was standing there over my shoulder, he'd been the one that had done the pump in it. So he was so invested in what I was doing because he was paying the bill.
Okay.
He was just some backyard guy that had a tow truck, and then they'd taken the car to him to get a pump done. And then it wouldn't start, and he brought it into the dealership.
Wow. That little backyard excursion of his cost him some money.
Yeah. So what when you think about the YouTube thing, because sometimes we talk about, I introduced you to some people today that are big on YouTube, right? What do you think about the guys that are on YouTube that are not technicians, but they're doing something in their backyard, and they're like, this is how I do this, or this is how I do that, or save money by going, don't go to the dealer and get ripped off. This is how you do a water pump, or this is how you do a phaser in a Ford. Or
right.
What do you think about that?
I've said it in my own videos where don't take everything I say as gospel. Could I be doing it in a way that's not going to work for you? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've watched other people's videos, those people, and it's like most of the time it's not a way I would ever consider doing something. Right. But I guess you really got to watch and understand what people are showing you and decide, is it something that's going to work for you? Is it something that makes sense?
Yeah.
Because some of these people really don't know what they're talking about. There's some people that do it professionally. I wouldn't say that I do YouTube professionally,
right.
But people that do it like me, and I've watched some people, I won't name anybody, but it's just like,
Are you talking about Scotty Kilmer? You can say it. Listen, don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. That guy is a black mark on the industry.
Yeah, okay.
And anybody that comes to your shop or any shop and says, well, Scotty Kilmer says, immediately show them the door and let them out.
Yeah, he's a joke.
Yeah.
He's an absolute joke.
Yeah.
And I've seen him, and it's just like, I get floored by stuff he says. It's like, are you really this ignorant?
Yeah. You'd love to have his YouTube following.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it'd be incredible.
He must have paid for that. It's the only thing I can think of.
I don't... He is a special individual, and I've never met the man. I don't
never
watch
have
his
either.
videos.
I can't stand listening to him. But every once in a blue moon, I'll watch something.
Rev up your engines.
Yeah.
Next channel, please. Like, yeah. I find that kind of idea of a guy in his backyard or in his driveway, shooting his mouth off.
Yep.
Telling people that what a professional does is ripping them off.
Yep.
That's the problem with YouTube and social creators. That's the problem I have with it. That's why the people I introduced you today, one thing in common with all of them is they're professional technicians. Right. They're guys and gals in the trenches that do this for a living.
Yeah, and that's me. I do this for a living. I do this every day. That's all I've ever done.
Right.
But I watched one of Scotty's videos one day, and he said about using oil stop leak in every oil change. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And he's basically telling people to use stop leak on every oil change.
Yeah.
No. No, don't do that.
Yep. The best one I ever saw is he took the catalytic converter out and dunked it in lacquer thinner and then installed it back in the car, because that's how you fix 420 DTCs on your Toyota when it's burned some oil and it's got a 420 DTCs. You take the catalytic converter out. He had a little wash basin. He filled that with lacquer thinner, and then he put that cat in it and let it soak in there for a day, and then he put it back in the car.
Really? Wow. Okay. Okay.
And you can sell that, Kenny. You can sell that to your customer as a fix because he does it. So it's a joke that when people come in and they say, well, I saw it on YouTube, right? That it shouldn't take this long for you to do this.
Oh, I've gotten people say that to me.
Yeah. How do you handle that?
I just tell them, what you see on YouTube, if it's that easy, you can do it. Because it's not that easy, and
Right.
I don't work off of YouTube.
Right.
Yes, I am on YouTube, but I don't work off of YouTube.
Yeah.
Take what I say with a grain of salt. I'm not telling you, like I said, I'm not gospel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a lot of people, the traction lately has been talking about is the union strike, right? The Automotive Workers Union, and the parts breakdown that's going to happen as a result of that. I saw you did a video a little while ago. Was it an alternator on a Kia or an alternator?
Yeah, it was my daughter's Kia.
How many alternators did it take to get that finally?
Two. Yeah, when we got the car home, because she got stuck with it, when we got it home, the battery light was not on, but it was not charging. I got a brand new alternator and put it in. Now the alternator light was on, but it wasn't charging.
Right.
Okay. Now that I knew how to do it, I swapped and I put the original one back in just out of curiosity. I was right there. I figured I was going to do it. I put that back in. Sure enough, the alternator light was out, but it wasn't charging.
Right.
So it's like, okay. I checked everything I had to check because, of course, I really didn't check anything, to be honest with you. It was just like, okay, it's an alternator.
It's an alternator. It's my daughter's car. I got to get it done. You were working at home with limited tools.
Yep. And this is when we first moved into the house. Literally, we were there not even a week.
Yep.
I wasn't even unpacked. So I went and I got another alternator, and I put that one in, and everything worked out fine. But we actually had, when I was at the other shop, Joe and Mo's, when I was there, we had a Lexus, I forgot what model it was. It's the 2-door rear-wheel drive, 2JZ motor.
Okay.
I forgot what model those things were. We wound up putting 3 aftermarket alternators in it and 2 factory alternators in it before we finally got one that worked. One of them worked, an aftermarket one worked, and it left for a week and then came back.
Yeah.
And, of course, you're second-guessing yourself.
Yes.
Like, am I doing something wrong here? Am I missing something?
Yep.
It can't possibly be 5 alternators. It was. And I know it was because the customer still came back for other work.
Right.
And it's just like, how do you explain that to somebody? You're thinking you're buying cheap parts. No, we're not buying cheap parts.
Yeah.
The first one, or the fourth one, was a Toyota alternator.
Yeah. Have you run into it with the Fords yet? Where the Fords, you'll get it in their smart charge system or whatever you call it, essentially duty cycle, voltage reg. Rich, we introduced you to Rich, Ford boss, on YouTube. I think he's got the record. His own car, I think he went through 8 on like a Grand Marquis before he finally got one that would both charge and keep the charging light off. Because he said it was nothing to get one that would charge, but the voltage regulator signal coming back, the ECM didn't like it and would turn the charge light on.
Right. I've heard of that.
Yeah.
I've actually never had a problem with one.
And he'd use 3 or 4 different Ford ones, Motorcraft ones, like O'Reilly's, every part store, didn't matter. It was just whatever the rebuilders out there that are building them, whatever they're putting in there, the circuitry for the voltage reg circuit, they don't like it. They're not accepting it. And he was frustrated. His videos, he talks about that. That's one of the biggest issues I'm now seeing in our industry is the quality of replacement parts.
Yeah, terrible.
It's really starting to hurt us because we're already fighting a battle most days with like accuracy of repair, competency of a lot of techs in the bays of being able to fix this stuff. And then, like you said, you go and do your due diligence and you diagnose that car properly and you put a part in and it either works or it doesn't.
Yep.
Like now you got an upset shop owner thinking that the tech must have diagnosed it wrong. You got an upset customer because the car's not promised when it was supposed to be.
Yep.
And who's at fault here? Well, then it becomes a whole argument of who screwed up. Well, what do the parts manufacturers do when it's on them? Hardly anything. They're not going to pay you for your labor for putting your daughter's alternator in twice.
Nope.
Most shops, if it goes through 5, they're not getting paid every time.
Nope.
It's terrible. It really is bad. I tell everybody, like, we're going to try the first one we get, and then but after that, I'm not sure how we're going to proceed from this because it's I'm not going to continue to try and eat the labor because we can't get a good part. I might call up somebody that I know has a known good one, and I put a used part in some of the time now before I'll go and grab a rebuilt part.
Oh, I prefer not to use rebuilds anymore. It's
Yeah.
just there's so many problems. But those alternators I put on my daughter's car, they were new.
Yeah.
You know, I specifically don't ask for rebuilds for that reason because there's just too many issues.
Yeah. I'd like to look at what the definition of a new part is, though, because you and I know from the dealer days, why were they always wanting those cores back? Because they're selling the cores to a rebuilder.
Yep.
And I don't mean a local rebuilder. I mean like Chrysler wants the cores back, and then they take all those housings or whatever, and somebody puts, another armature in it or another voltage regulator. But you don't know. Is that technically new? Well,
I don't know. It's a good question. It's really a good question.
It's got a new voltage regulator in it, but it's not the one that's supposed to be in it. It's still new, but
But then again, at some point you have to have enough used parts to have remanufactured parts.
Yeah, and that's remanufactured. I wonder how that even, because I guess they can say, like, we know what a remanufactured axle is, for example. Like, we all know what a remanufactured CV axle is. But a remanufactured starter, well, what's really left? And if I have a good housing over here, and I put a new armature and a new set of brushes and a new bearing, and is it now technically new? It kind of is.
It kind of is, yeah. If the only thing left was the actual housing.
Yeah. But whatever parts we're putting in it still weren't of OE spec.
Right.
Right? And I think that's where, so when the customer says to me, well, it wasn't a rebuild, it was new. Yeah, well.
Yeah.
That's the frustrating thing. I almost hate, a call in when it's, or a tow in or a call in when it's like a starter or an alternator. Not because I can't diagnose it fast and effectively. It's just, what am I going to get for a part this time? And it's getting worse now. Guys from Dorman are here. You've seen the hate for them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever talked about that, the Dorman stuff?
I've actually had very good luck with Dorman. I did have a problem with something of theirs, but it's few and far between. I've actually had pretty darn good luck with their stuff.
Yeah.
But you're talking about used parts too that you were just discussing. Have you noticed, like, you go to tell a customer, okay, well, you just you need an engine for your car. Well, guess what? An engine's $3,000.
Yeah.
And we could find a used one for $2,200 or a reman for $3,000 or whatever. And they're like, well, I find one online. I can get one off of eBay for $800.
Yeah. Yep.
I have 2 experiences with that so far.
And the unfortunate thing is, I think what I'm seeing happen is that the price from eBay is from the same kind of vendor that you and I might buy it from. But they're charging us $1,800.
Yep.
Because they think that we're going to send it back.
Yep.
Whereas they'll sell it for $800 to somebody with no warranty, no nothing.
Yep.
And it's the same part.
Yep.
Right? And we're very much against, like we talk in the Changing Industry Group and ASOG and all that kind of stuff. We're about customer supplied parts. And I'm not going to, if you allow customers to bring you your parts, I'm not going to tell you that's right or wrong. It's your business at the end of the day, Kenny, to run it any way you want. Right? I'm not going to get all high and mighty and say that, it's a disservice to the industry because the shop I just left, they did that. I said my piece on what I thought was, well, if we don't, and we put our margins for this and we actually buy our parts, we can offer something better. Wasn't my business at the end of the day.
Right.
If we made a little bit more money, we could have bought some better tooling and, might have been able to pay me a little bit more. But you know what? You're the boss. It's your shop. So, but what I've hated is the fact of, we let the customer bring us that $800 engine that we know nothing about, and we put it in the car and you hit click, click, click.
You're letting the customer dictate the repair.
Dictate the process. Yep. You've heard me say that, in some of the podcast episodes, and I've even, people see my comments pop up in some of the YouTube threads, and I think they're knowing who it is, whether it's because I say dictate the process all the time. I have an old story about a customer supplied engine. 2000, when I was working back in the little gas station, there was a guy that came in with a Monte Carlo SS, and it was a 1985 Monte Carlo SS, and somebody painted it Barney purple. So it was an SS for sure, but it had been painted over with the worst, probably a rattle can trim clad Barney purple. And I'm like, it's in for an overheat. So I'm like, wow. So we get into the thing, and the guy says, I don't want heads put on this thing. We knew it was a head gasket. I don't want heads put in this. I already got an engine. So he, of course, then the car, I start the one day, I pull the engine into this Monte Carlo SS, and I'm like, this is kind of cool. I was driving back home, I had a 75 Malibu.
Okay.
2-door with a 350 small block in it. So I was kind of familiar with the, that kind of platform, right? So no big deal. Pull the engine out. So take his engine out, put it on the used tire in the corner of the thing. We get his engine jacked in, put it into the car, hook everything up in it, hit the key, clunk, clunk. I'm like, uh-oh. So my mentor at the time, Paul, comes over and he's like, did anybody check that engine? Adrian. He's yelling at Adrian. Adrian's the shop owner. Adrian's like, no. We put a bar on the front crank bolt. Engine seized up. So that engine that we just finished bolting into the car. And so people are listening. You're going, what a bunch of idiots. Yeah, we were. We were stupid. We let the customer bring us something we never bothered to check. Before we put it in the car, I was just told, go and get, because he was doing it for probably next to nothing. That's why I was the one doing it, because they were paying me $11 an hour, in 2002 to put a fucking small block, So, of course, we take his engine back, put his engine back in the car, take the heads off it. That whatever engine it came out of, we don't ever know what it was. I think they said it was a 350. Had already been bored out 60 anyway. So we slapped a set of gaskets in that, slapped the heads back on it, shipped it, kicked it, told the guy, don't ever bring your car back. And I remember he brought the car back like 6 months later, tranny ate out of it, right? He's like, you guys effed up my tranny. And,
of course you did.
Yeah. And I'm like, we didn't F up your tranny, dude. Like, it left shifting, right? We did a little smoky burnout in the parking lot. Like, not smoky, but I mean, it's had a one-wheel, one-wheel peel. Yeah. Like, it's not going to do much, but it was a running SS again. And that's when I learned at a very young point in my career that there's some customers you just don't bother with. Mm-hmm. But I worked for a guy that he said no to nothing. I was getting paid $11 an hour in 2001. He was running a shop where we were putting on, it didn't matter the quality of the part. If it had a lifetime guarantee, it got that set of brake pads. Didn't matter if they made noise, didn't matter. If the Walker muffler broke off, what Walker could be like, junk. If the pipe broke off inside the Walker muffler, we put a pipe in it, and the customer got a new muffler because it was lifetime warranty. And there was stacks of mufflers with the pipe broke off on the inside because he'd hang a brand new muffler on an old rotten pipe the first time and then do the repair again and again and again. It just went on in ad nauseum for that. He would pile up all his, can't remember the name of the brake pad, but there was something that had a lifetime warranty, and there was a stack by the door that was as taller than I was of brake pads in boxes to go back, and that was his credit for his parts bill for the month.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and so that's how we did business, right? We would take so many rotors off. We didn't have a lathe in-house, and there was a machine shop at the parts store right across the, plaza. They would machine our rotors. So it'd be tied up on the bay waiting for them to cut 2 rotors or cut 4 rotors. And back then, you could probably buy a rotor for $40.
Right.
But the machine shop would only charge you $30 to machine 2. It was a shithole. But I learned a ton.
And they probably gave you a really bad cut also.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to look at them. And I remember so many times we would take them off the lathe. We'd put them on the car. It was now 4 o'clock. You drive in the car. Customer's waiting to pick it up at 5 o'clock. You go drive it. It's pulsating.
Yep.
So then you got to call up, yell at the parts department over there at the parts store. They send over the cheapest white box junk rotors. Yep. You put it on. The pulsation doesn't pulsate anymore. Customer picks up and leaves with their car.
Down the road.
And I was like, is this really how business is done? So when I left that shop to go to the dealer, all of a sudden it was like,
your eyes open up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we get into these conversations in the industry where people hate on independents, or we hate on dealerships, or we hate on independent techs, or we hate on dealer techs, it's got nothing to do with that. Where you are under the sign that you work means very little. It's all about what kind of technician you are,
yep.
What kind of technician I am, yep. What kind of technician the service advisor, or technician, how good's your service advisor? Mm-hmm. What's the culture of your service manager? How does he think? The owner of the shop.
Yep.
It's got very little to do with where you work. You know, I hate that when people judge, like, because you don't go around talking on your thing about, I was a dealer tech for 21 years, right? When I saw you do the first video I ever saw about you, I would have never thought you were a dealer tech. I just thought you were a guy that had always worked on cars, anything and everything that came in. Now, you are a guy that can work on anything that ever comes in, but I would have never thought you had 21 years of one brand.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it was. We also had GMC there.
Yeah.
So I did have some GM experience with it. Mm-hmm. But the nice thing at our dealer, it was a very family-oriented place. So, and everybody that worked there, a lot of people were there for many, many years.
Yeah.
And everybody took pride in their work. And then, of course, we would get new techs that would come in, and they would do work, and it was just like, no. No. You're not doing this as fast as you possibly can to make money.
Yeah.
You're doing this to do the right job for the customer. Mm-hmm. That's how you have to concentrate on it. And they're like, well, I need to make money. I don't care what you need to make. If that's the type of person you are, you can walk out the door. Yeah. You know, I wouldn't have that. I couldn't take that with people. And I was a team leader, you know, and we were basically, the Chrysler side was broken up into 3 teams. I was one team leader, and the GM department, they had one team because it was just GMC.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, we had a bunch of very good people, and it's just, you had to teach the new people that came in the way you're used to working. Change it.
Right.
Change it.
Yeah.
So,
whatever happened to that dealer? Is it still around?
It's still around.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, it was a family-run dealer. It's Meadowland Chrysler.
Okay.
In Carmel, New York, and it was a great place. It really was. I started having my issues towards the end there. It was probably me becoming disgruntled over time because things weren't going the way I thought they should go.
Right.
It became a point where, you know, it's time to leave.
Yeah.
And then my friend who had B&M Auto Body, he was having health issues, and he was asking me to come and help him because otherwise he might have to close down his business. Mm-hmm. I decided, you know what, now's time for a change. Yeah. So that's why I made that change.
Where did you get? At what point did you get in? Because I heard you talk at one point about the 5-liter Mustangs and stuff. When did you kind of get into that?
When I had my shop.
Okay.
My shop was from 89 to 97. And, you know, the 5-liter Mustang was really exploding.
Yeah.
And I purchased an 88 Mustang, and I got caught street racing with it. Mm-hmm. It was all stock, you know, because back then there really wasn't any modifications to do. It was pretty stock, and I got caught street racing, and that's a pretty hefty fine. And my insurance doubled, so I was just like, well, I kind of can't afford this right now. So I got rid of that car, and then in 1990, I happened to see one sitting at this dealership, and it was sitting in a corner, and for some reason they couldn't sell it.
Yeah.
So one day I said, you know what, let me stop there and just see what's going on with that car. So I wound up making a smoking deal on this Mustang, and I got back into the 5-liter Mustangs. And then when I had the shop, I used to have a bunch of people all of a sudden started showing up, and I actually wound up being in Muscle Mustangs and Fast Fords. Mm-hmm. I wound up being in that magazine 6 different times. Yeah. You know, working on cars for the magazine. Right. So it was pretty cool. It was a good experience.
Some of them got to be pretty fast.
The one guy that worked, I have terrible allergies. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
One of the guys that worked with me, his Mustang, he had a coupe, 5-liter 5-speed, and it would run 10 in the quarter mile. It was a 1030 at 133 miles an hour. Gee. And it was a street car. Back in 1992, 3, 4, whatever year that was a pretty darn fast street car.
That was really quick.
You know, for a street car, that was real quick.
No turbo back then, or
no turbo? It's just nitrous.
Yeah.
You know, but it was it would pull wheelies and everything else. But he drove it. That was his daily driver car. Yeah. So it was pretty cool. That was the fastest car that we had in the group. Yep. You know, I had my own cars that were they were really not much done to them, just, you know, street cars, and you know, I was known for just taking them out and just abusing the daylights out of them.
New York always had from what I remember, always had a really vibrant street racing scene, right?
Yes.
Detroit, New York, you know, and then California, obviously, like LA, and the big thing. But, you know, when the TV show hit, like, you know, Street Outlaws. Yep. You know, and all those guys, nobody knew what Oklahoma was about until they kind of come. But I remember I remember growing up, and I remember I didn't go to the street races that one night because my Malibu was a dog. You know, the 75 Malibu 2-door, 2-barrel carburetor, Made 140 horsepower when it was brand new.
Yep.
Which everybody's like, that's slow as hell. 1975 Corvette, excuse me, thank you very much. It only made 155 horsepower with a 4-barrel carburetor. So y'all stop hating on my Malibu, because that was all I would have needed was a carburetor change, and I'd have been making what the Corvette made in 75. But
and right about that same time, the Dodge Little Red Express pickup truck was the fastest production car.
So I grew up wrenching, or I started wrenching. My buddy has a 77 Warlock. Dodge Warlock.
Oh, okay, yep.
So, which is like a Little Red Express, but without the pipes, right? Yep. Essentially, so all the same, the pinstripe graphics on the inside and all that kind of stuff. And it used to be a 400 truck, and he had a 440 in it, and a torque flight, and he put a complete 3-inch Mandrel bend. That was the first Mandrel bent system that I'd ever seen. Real Mandrel bend,
right?
Like you could put the tennis ball in at one end and it would run right out the other.
Yep.
No mufflers, no cats, and that's where we learned to do Hollies. That's where we learned to, and I can still remember the first time he called me and he says, I just swapped my fuel pump and my truck won't start. I'm like, okay. So we go over there, and sure enough, there's no fuel pump. There's no fuel pressure. And we're trying to crank it up, and it's not going. And I'm like, I'm thinking, I've never had a fuel pump off a big block Dodge, but I've had one off my, small block, and there's maybe the push rod's not there. And so we kept cranking it. Well, eventually it stopped where it wouldn't crank from the key. We'd crank this thing so much. So then we started jumping it from the relay. And we were dumb. We were moving it. We didn't know what was going on. We just knew that it didn't have, because you'd pour some gas down the carb and it would light off and just burn your eyebrows right off, singe your arm. And we did that for about a couple hours. Then we went home. And he decided he went and ordered like a Holly pump, electrical, put it on to where the, that pump was. And then, so then he ended up with too much fuel pressure. But when he took the pump off, he said, I know why it won't start. I'm like, why is that? He's like, the push rod wasn't on the lever. It had rolled off to the side or whatever and wasn't pushing on the lever of the mechanical fuel pump. But by then he had that electric pump. And I think the lowest you could get the fuel pressure to go down was like 10 PSI.
Which is still too high.
Too much, right?
So then he kept going 6 or 7, if I'm not mistaken.
And then he kept going to a bigger carburetor. And we lived in Canada. Well, then he got like an 800 that somebody milled the air horn off. There's no choke.
Okay.
And I'm like, this is going to be one hell of a street car. So finally he got that going where at least it would fire off and start. It ended up we burnt a wire going through the bulkhead connector in the firewall. That's why it wouldn't crank from the key. He got a harness from out west and put it in the whole thing. And I remember hearing that car that truck when it fired up and ran. And that thing was amazing. That was so cool, right? It was so loud. No mufflers on it, just straight pipes, right? And blap, blap. And then he put Flowmaster 50s or 40s on it way back then.
Just to quiet it down.
Just to
take the edge off.
Yeah, and what a cool truck that was to drive. Now, that truck's got an EFI swapped out of a modern Hemi.
Oh, okay.
And full EFI, but he bought Indy cylinder heads to put on it. Like he was going full bore with, the whole thing. And that's where I learned. And I didn't love Dodge then, but I thought that truck was cool. So then for me to wind up in the dealership was like weird because I'd grown up in a Chevy family. But I can remember he had gone to the races, the unofficial street drags, the one night out my way, and I stayed home. And we had a 5-liter Mustang, a guy, it was stick, and the clutch came apart. No bell housing blanket on it, and it hit a kid in the leg.
Oof.
And he was all right. But I thought that's not really my scene. Like I don't have a fast enough car, and B, the street racing thing was just like,
We used to go down to Gun Hill Road in the Bronx.
Okay.
I think it's the Bronx, and not that we would race, but we would go there and watch. And it's like after a while, you're like, you know what? This is actually these guys are dangerous.
Yeah,
these guys are actually dangerous. And I mean, I've seen street racing where, I don't condone it, but it's just, you could see it like they take precautions and they are careful and they go about it the right way. There's not people around and whatnot. But when we were down there, I mean, this is the city streets, and it's just like, somebody's going to get themselves killed doing this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some of these cars, too, shouldn't have even been on the road.
Right? I can remember that, too. Like, I can remember batteries in the trunk bouncing around because somebody, just...
I remember a guy with a tubbed Malibu or a Pontiac Le Mans.
Yeah.
It was a G-body. I remember the guy pulling out, and he was doing burnouts and stuff with it, and I realized he had no tubs. So he was getting hit in the back with burning rubber chunks.
But he made it out that night.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
He made it out to have some fun, but it was just like, wow.
Yeah. When I heard that the clutch came apart and went through the bell housing, I was like, they can actually do that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Crazy,
yeah, clutch explosions are really wicked.
Yeah. But that was the first, and then there was a guy that helped me get my Malibu on the road. He had a 68 big block Camaro with a 4-speed in it, all original car, and that was pretty cool. That was a pretty sweet car. The fastest thing that scared me, the first thing that ever really scared me, when I was working in Toronto years ago, a guy had a 31 Model A with a 327 and a top loader 4-speed in it.
Oh, wow.
And that was amazing in Toronto to drive because we're talking 1998. How old is that car already?
Right.
There's not a whole lot of Ford vintage metal around Canada anymore, and there wasn't even back then. And that was his daily. He drove that daily. Wow. And he had a 45-minute commute into Toronto every day, and he drove that car. And he had 2 friends with Chevelles, 350 Chevelles. Everybody wanted to run a 4-speed back then. And that car was still faster than Chevelles just because it weighed nothing.
Right.
And it was purple. Something to me about in purple cars. But it was purple, and it was the kid had grown up on Hot Rod Magazine, that was the coolest thing I'd ever rode in my life. The next thing that gave me that exhilaration is I had an SRT8 Challenger 4-speed car come in, and I got to do the PDI on it, and I drove that, and that scared the heck out of me. There's something about that kind of car when the ass end's kicking around and it's going as fast as it's going. It shouldn't go that fast, and it shouldn't handle the way it does for the big tubby fat bottom thing that it is, right? It was just the coolest thing. I'd driven a Viper, and I'd take that SRT8 Challenger with a stick any day over the Viper. Just the way it made me feel to drive it.
We got one of the first Hellcats in. Oh. And it was the manual 6-speed, and I did the PDI on it, and I took it for a ride. I come back, and the sales manager said, "What do you think?" I said, "It needs to lose either brakes, speed, or handling.
Yeah.
It needs to lose one of them." I said, "I'd kill myself in this thing."
Yeah.
It was way too fun to drive, and I would push it to its limit.
Yeah.
I couldn't own something like that. There's no way.
What do you think about what's going to happen? Because you've heard probably Chrysler talk about the future of what they're going to do, right? It's going to be straight EV. And you saw just recently that Demon, right? The Demon's kind of...
Yeah, the Demon 170, I think they called it.
I think they pretty much peaked with the Demon, what that car can do, right? When you think about it in that Demon. Did you see the thing on the Demon box where you get the reflash DCU and you put it all in, and essentially it's a 9-second street car?
Yep.
I think because now they're talking with Stellantis, they're going to be EVs.
The new cars are cool. They don't really impress me, though. I mean, they're impressive in their performance and everything else, but it's just not. It's not something I would want to own and drive. It's like I'd rather have an old hot rod.
Yeah,
but it's just me. I'm not knocking the cars. It's just me. I would rather have, if I went to a car show and I saw a brand new Demon parked next to a 71 Demon.
Yeah,
I'll be all over that 71 Demon.
I had a friend in trade school. He had a Demon. It was parked in a barn. I hadn't run in years.
Awesome.
But that was the first thing I'd ever, like the first Demon I'd ever seen. I'd seen lots of Dusters, right? But that was the first. You got a Demon?
Yeah.
What the heck's a Demon? Oh, it's a Duster. Okay, cool.
Yep.
But I mean, the little graphics and everything. But
the little graphics and the different taillights and
But I mean, I never got to drive an SRT8, but I wanted like a Hellcat. Excuse me. I drove an SRT8. It was yellow. It was ugly as shit. It took them forever to sell it because it was yellow. But you know what Mopar people are like, right? We don't care about color.
Yeah.
Like Panther pink, royal purple, all that. Give us that ugly shit. We love that stuff. But that car was amazing to drive. But I got the same thing. I got in it and I'm like, it's got too big a radio screen. Yes. I want crank windows. I want manual locks. Yeah. I don't need the alloy rims. Give me a steel with a hubcap on it. Give me something like that. And
as odd as it sounds, whenever I do drive one of those cars, I actually prefer the automatics. I like the way they feel over the stick. I don't know what it is. And I'm a stick person. I love stick.
Yeah.
I think it's just because they're so high horsepower that the automatic just feels more natural in that car.
Yeah. Yeah. I drive a Wrangler, and I'm same thing. I love a stick, but my knee won't do it anymore for a daily. You know, if I had a hot rod, I'd go get one again. But when I was test driving my Wranglers to buy, I took to, and you know, I've owned a lot of Jeeps. I like Jeep. It's probably my favorite brand. But I just was like, I can't drive this thing to work every day and go through stopping traffic with a stick anymore. And it's too bad because it's such an easier platform. Even I could put a clutch in for $200 if I need to. Right? If that transmission decides it needs an overhaul, I'm in a fair chunk of change.
Yeah.
So, but the knee won't do it. But if I had a hot rod tomorrow, man, I'd still go right back to a 5 or 6 speed.
Oh yeah,
all day.
I'm building a Hornet, and
what's that like?
It's an AMC Hornet, 75 AMC Hornet hatchback, and I'm going to actually put a 6-speed in it. Not because I prefer to have the 6-speed. I would actually prefer to have a 4-speed.
Yeah.
But I happen to have one, so it's like it's going to go in that car.
Right. And what about for power plant?
Okay, I'm going to irritate some AMC guys, but I'm going to put an LS motor in it.
Yes.
I have a 6-liter and I have a 5.3.
Yep.
However, I also have an AMC inline 6. Actually, not. It's a Jeep inline 6 4-liter.
Yeah, I know.
I have a 4-liter fuel injected with a 5-speed from a Cherokee. That's up in New York. I got to get that down here, and I kind of want to make the car a mule. I want to put the LS in it with the 6-speed. I want to put the AMC inline 6, or the 4-liter, I should say, with the 5-speed in it. Like, I want to try a couple different combinations with the car just to see.
Yeah.
I also have an AMC 401 motor.
Okay. Yeah.
But I got nothing to go behind it. I could put the 6-speed behind it with the right bell housing.
Yeah.
I could even put, believe it or not, that 5-speed that's bolted to the 4-liter will bolt right up to that AMC 401.
It should, yeah.
So there's a couple of different things I want to do to it, but the 5.3 and 6-liter is going to be the predominant. That's what's actually going to get.
They're a lightweight car too, a Hornet, aren't they?
Yeah, it's like a Duster.
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit lighter than a Duster.
Yeah.
Talk about cars that got swapped. My dad. Now this was back when I had my shop. I had purchased a wrecked 5-liter Mustang. It was a brand new car, and it got totaled. And I bought it from the wrecking yard, complete. And I think I paid $1,500 for it. It was nailed in the passenger side.
Right.
But it still ran. It was an automatic car, and but I bought the car. I disassembled it, and in the corner of my shop, I had the engine and transmission just sitting there. So my father had a Volvo 240 turbo wagon. You know where this is going.
Oh, yeah.
And he had a severe oil leak in it. So I'm looking at the car, and I'm like, okay, well, the rear main seal's leaking, the front main seal's leaking, the head gasket's leaking, the valve cover gasket's leaking, the turbo's leaking, everything's leaking.
Sounds like a Volvo. Yep.
So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to pull this thing apart. I'm going to pull the motor out, and I'm going to reseal it. So I pulled the motor and tranny out as an assembly. And I happened to be staring. The idea to do this swap was never there in the beginning. But I had the engine and the tranny on the hoist, and in the foreground, I could see or in the background, I could see the engine and tranny, the 5-liter sitting there. And I'm looking and like the dimensions are the same.
Yeah.
So I walk over and I actually take a really good look, and I'm like measuring stuff. I'm like, huh. So I put the Volvo motor to the side, and that was that 4-cylinder. I pick up the 5-liter, and I go and I dropped it right in place, and it fit like a glove.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at it, I'm like, this is never coming out of here. I never took it back out. I actually made mounts and everything else to fit it into the car like that. I had the AC working. I had the power steering working. Wow. I had everything working, and the fuel injection.
Yeah.
And this was 1994, I think. Wow. I did all of this. And I drove it back home, and I pulled it in the driveway. It had single exhaust still, but it was like a 3-inch single exhaust, one of those big Flowmasters, because I wanted it quiet, because my dad didn't like noise.
Yeah.
So I pulled it in the driveway, and I said, I want you to take it for a ride. He goes, why? He goes, didn't you just fix it? And I had the car a month.
Yeah.
He goes, didn't you just fix an oil leak? I said, yeah, I did a little more than that. So he's looking at me like, what the hell did you do to my car? So he goes out there and he starts it up. As soon as he starts it, he looks at me. Like, you got to be kidding me, right?
Yeah.
So, because you could tell, even though it was quiet, you could tell.
Oh, yeah.
So he takes it, he comes back from his road test. He comes back with a grin on his face. He goes, okay, nice work. And then he walked in the house. That's all he said. He didn't even look underneath the hood. About 2 months later, now he used to commute with that car.
Yeah.
He commuted 55 miles one way to work.
Wow.
So he's commuting with this car. After about 2 months, he comes up to me. He says, do you know, he goes, that thing gets better gas mileage now than it did before.
That's awesome, Kenny. That is awesome.
Yeah, that was a fun car.
Yeah.
And with that same car, I got busted again for street racing. So, because picture this, it was like 1994, 1995. The new generation Corvette was out at the time.
Yeah.
I had just gotten a car together. I put a set of M&H's on the back of it because it would just light up one tire otherwise. Mm-hmm. I went down Central Avenue in Yonkers, New York with this car, and that was a well-known street racing scene.
Yeah.
I happened to pull up on a relatively new Corvette. And, of course, the guy's not looking at me. The car's quiet. He's not thinking anything. The light turns green. I make sure I stay ahead of him the whole time. So we get up to the next traffic light. He starts looking at me, and his girlfriend's in the car. She's looking over like, what just happened?
Yeah.
Like, we didn't try to race. So I'm not looking at him. My friend's in the passenger seat, and he's trying not to laugh. So the light turns green. He jumps it, and I jump it at the same time, and we're neck and neck. And, like, you can hear him. He's floored. I'm floored. We get to the next traffic light, and he's looking over like, you're kidding me, right?
Yeah.
We do it again. On the third time, still neck and neck, all of a sudden we got popped by the Yonkers police.
Oh, man.
So the guy's like, you were street racing. I'm like, I'm in a Volvo. And so he goes, I said, that's a Corvette. I wasn't street racing him.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, come on. He goes, I'm not stupid. So he says, he goes, look, he goes, after the whole thing, he goes, look, I'm actually pretty impressed. He goes, but he says, I'm going to write you a ticket. He says, show up at court. He goes, your license is clean. He goes, we'll take care of it.
Mm-hmm.
So sure enough, I go to court and it got squashed. So it was pretty cool. The guy in the Corvette was embarrassed. And I actually have a video of it. The funny thing is, after my father stopped driving it, I took it to Englishtown, Raceway Park, Englishtown, New Jersey. And I have a video of the car where I actually lined up against a Corvette, and I beat the Corvette, and you can hear the announcer saying, the guy in the Corvette has got to be embarrassed.
Well, Kenny, I want to thank you. That's been fun. So, what do you want to see change? Where are you headed with the Kenny Wrenchin with Kenny, and what do you want to see change in the industry? What do you want to change about what you're doing? Anything?
Obviously, I want to see my channel grow. I'd like to do podcasts more.
Mm-hmm.
Until you and Motormouth Radio reached out to me, which was a couple months ago.
Yeah.
I really didn't give it a second thought. I really didn't think much of it, and it kind of intrigues me. And this is only my second time ever doing anything like this.
Yep.
So it's I get the jitters, but it's like it calms down, and it seems pretty cool. I'd like to do more of this.
Yeah.
I'd obviously like to take my channel to the next level, and but currently, I have to work for somebody else. I don't want to have my own shop per se. I work out of my house a little bit here and there. I don't do a lot of it because I don't want it to take up family time.
Yeah.
As far as the industry goes, honestly, I wish there was more. I don't know if regulation is the right word, but like in the United States, if I picked up a wrench, I could be a mechanic.
Yep.
So it's like, how do you know that this guy knows what he's doing? To be an electrician, you have to be certified. To be a plumber, you have to be certified. Why not be certified to be a mechanic? This way, you're at least getting somebody that has some knowledge behind them. Because these people that do this job that act like a mechanic, I hate saying it that way, but you know what I mean.
No, I know exactly what you mean.
It's like they do give a bad rap to the whole industry.
Yeah.
They really do. And, we're trying to overcome that.
Yeah.
You're trying to, show people that, hey, this is not how the industry really is.
Yeah.
You get a few bad apples that just make it bad for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. We had that conversation this week so many times about regulation and everything else, and a lot of people are hoping that we can do it ourselves without involving the government. Because
No, like, I don't mean like involving the government,
Yeah.
but like just like ASC. I've seen too many people take ASC exams that couldn't screw in a light bulb.
Yeah, couldn't fix a sandwich.
Yeah, couldn't fix a sandwich,
Right.
exactly.
Yep.
And I worked with a guy one time at the first dealership I was at. Like I said, I was at that one dealership for 1 year, and then for the 21 years thereafter, I was at the other dealership. And I worked with a guy who was ASE certified in everything, and I don't think he could put air in a tire without having a problem. Wow. I mean, just terrible.
Good at tests, though.
Yeah, really good at tests.
Good at tests.
But,
well, I want to thank you for coming on. This
Thank
has
you,
been a blast, man. I didn't know what to expect, but I thought it would go really well.
Oh, thank you. I
'Cause,
do appreciate
your
this.
Your personality comes through, and it's nice, and you've got that lots of good stories, and I mean, I think you're now. I've got one of my most seasoned guests, I guess I would say, with years in.
Okay.
And I don't mean any disrespect from that. You know
No,
what I mean?
I get you.
You've done this a long, long time, and that's why, we interview a lot of young people, but and I don't want to admit yet that I'm older, but I mean, I got 25 years in, but I mean, it's a situation of, I want to. Everybody's opinion is valid.
Oh, yes.
Everybody's story is relevant. And I want to thank you for coming on and sharing yours with me, man. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
You're very welcome.
Appreciate it.
We'll do this again at some point for sure. And,
We could do it remotely too, right?
Yeah, we can do it remotely. And I mean, I'll continue to watch your channel. And, anybody that that has an interesting story or whatever, and you think it should be shared, have them reach out to me, man.
Okay.
I'd love to, push your platform and get mine out there to more people, because this is the only way we get it to improve, right?
Yep. Yep.
All right. We appreciate you. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you, man. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. We'll do this again at some point for sure. And,
we could do it remotely too, right?
Yeah, we can do it remotely. And I mean, I'll continue to watch your channel, and, anybody that that has an interesting story or whatever, and you think it should be shared, have them reach out to me, man.
Okay.
I'd love to, push your platform and get mine out there to more people, because this is the only way we get it to improve, right?
Yep. Yep.
Hey, if you could do me a favor real quick and comment on, and share this episode, I'd really appreciate it. And please, most importantly, set the podcast to automatically download every Tuesday morning. As always, I'd like to thank our amazing guests for their perspectives and expertise, and I hope that you'll please join us again next week on this journey of change. Thank you to my partners in the ASA group and to the Changing the Industry podcast. Remember what I always say, in this industry, you get what you pay for. Here's hoping everyone finds their missing 10 millimeter, and we'll see you all again next time.